And first of all, I strongly agree with Mr. Valvonis that a key element in the whole situation at the moment is the remuneration and therefore the incentive structure of management. And one point that I would make in this is that it's not only the remuneration and incentive structure of bank management, but you can make the same kind of argument for CEOs of every public company. And indeed, there is a very good recent book just out by Andrew Smithers. I've forgotten its title. I have it in my briefcase, and I will bring it forward in the second session so you can see its title, which in fact attributes a great deal of the sluggish recovery to the unwillingness of managers of public companies everywhere to invest long-term because they wish to maximize short-term equity valuation through dividends and buybacks in order to improve their own position as very large-scale equity holders because they get such large bonuses in equity format. And so I think that you need to widen the discussion of remuneration and incentives beyond just bank management to management everywhere. The second point that I would make is that there's been an enormous concentration in this panel and panels like this that I've attended on lending to SMEs. And I understand why. However, when you get a startup of SMEs, and Carol can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, the English data, or the British data with which I'm familiar, suggests that something like 60% or even 80% of new startups actually fail. Now, banks are supposed to provide a safe repository of funds for savers. And we've been told about how banks are the natural partners of SMEs. But how can a bank, which is supposed to be safe, and when banks fail, we get chaos like Lehman's, how can banks be a natural partner for SMEs when SMEs are so subject to failure? Well, one of the answers to that conundrum is that banks don't just lend on unsecured overdraft form to SMEs because SMEs are so subject to potential failure, they ask for collateral. Now, what collateral can SMEs actually provide? And the answer to that one is that most of the collateral that SMEs have is actually their own property, housing and whatever land they may have. And indeed, there was a study that I recall well in the UK that the greatest single determinant of new startups in the UK was nothing to do with the banks. It was to do with the housing market, because when the housing market was strong, the collateral that SMEs had was actually rather greater. So that SME lending, in effect, is another branch of lending on property. And lending on property is actually what banks now primarily do. As Adair Turner showed, at any rate for the UK, only 15% of bank lending to the private sector goes direct to corporates. The rest of it goes to persons, and the vast bulk of it goes on mortgages. Now, we all talk about banking crises, and I have been through 3 financial crises in the UK, 73, 75, 91, 92, 2007, 2008, and all of these have been due to the interaction between bank lending and bank leverage and a property, whether commercial or residential, sizable boom. You could describe it as a bubble if you like. And one has to ask oneself, is the relationship between property, finance, and banking actually appropriate? because mortgages are a very long-term asset, while banks finance themselves primarily at a short date. So getting banks into the mortgage business, which is essentially where they are primarily, is reinforcing the maturity mismatch between short-dated liabilities and long-dated assets. And I can tell you that Vickers or the Independent Commission on Banking in the UK and Liikanen does nothing to deal with that maturity mismatch. If anything, in fact, reinforces and enhances it. So we've got an interaction between lending on mortgage to the property sector and banking. And one's got to ask oneself, is that in fact appropriate? And what I really miss in the discussions on banking and all of that, and I have missed again in the discussion this morning, is that all the focus is on banking. And sure, there is a lot wrong with banking as well. But there has really been no discussion about the housing finance, about making housing finance safer, about what is the appropriate structure of the mortgage market, about how we can deal with the maturity mismatch that bank lending primarily on mortgages actually introduces. So the two areas that I would like to emphasize for you is the remuneration issue, which I think is wider than just banking, and the housing finance issue, which has been studiously, in my view, ignored while everyone talks about what's wrong with banking. I mean, have we got the relationship between banking and housing finance actually right?